folks, welcome back to another Paul Master video, and today I thought we'd do an update on the team building guide as it's been a year. A lot has actually changed, especially with the introduction of zone in this game that came in late December last year, and now that we also have buddy moves as well as a thing, so that's another extra factor. And since it's the anniversary, probably a lot of newer players or returning players picking up the game, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to update the team building guide, and let's talk about it, right? So let's start with the basics, I guess. So the very basics of team building is there are 3 slots in terms of single player, right? And so in co-op, it's a bit different. We're not going to talk too much about co-op. I might talk about it like a bit. The reason why I'm not really talking about co-op too much is the game is mainly single player. Co-op modes are not super relevant. Also, you could just, morality aside, generally stages are easy enough that you could just queue up with like any rando. You could have like a level 1 Pikachu in there and you'd still get carried. But that aside. So let's talk about this. So you have 3 slots over here, and use them. Use them. There's almost no advantage to using less than 3 units. Some people may argue maybe it saves you a unit or 2 in Legendary Gauntlet. I personally disagree. I don't think it's relevant. I think that even in Legendary Gauntlet you should use 3 units, as even if they could solo, gets you an easier time passing, or duo it, and the amount of units you eventually end up using / not using is generally not relevant to the entire run, but that's a completely different conversation. Anyways, 3 slots, use them, right? So, for example, if we're looking at this team right now, looks really cool. Got Daga, Palkia, Giratina. That's the 3 Sinnoh legendaries. Very cool. Title box legendary. This team sucks. This team is not fantastic. Is it gonna still beat you, some stages, get you some success? Yes, because all 3 of these units are individually very powerful units. All 3 of them, incredibly powerful units. But do they work together that well? Not really. I guess Cyrus and Daga has like a slight bit of synergy over there, because Daga does set Dragon Zone and Cyrus can do Dragon type damage, but they largely conflict with Cynthia a lot because Cynthia is a Ghost Zone setter, and you can't have 2 zones existing at the same time. Plus, there's no real tank on this team. Your team's gonna get annihilated in some very hard hitting stages like full offense, master mode, etc. Right? So no, this is not how you should build your team. As cool as it looks, right? You can do this for fun. You can still beat some stages because again, they're all really individually powerful units, but you generally want a more cohesive team. So in this game, there's a few basic roles: striker, tech, support. Strikers, the game intends to be the main damage dealers, right? Techs are supposed to be units that debuff the opponents, status the opponents, flim trap confuse, all that shenanigans, set weather, terrain, zone, all that stuff. That's generally what techs are supposed to do in this game. And then supports are supposed to sometimes tank hits, heal your team, buff stats, right? So that's what they were intended to do. Is that actually the case for the units? Not really. Nowadays units are very fluid. A lot of supports can do some damage, right? There's damage. There's strikers that could buff your team's stats, and like the number one like regular and AoE sync nuker like damage dealer in the game is like a tech. So it's not even a striker. So anyways, like we could go through like a few examples. For example, let's see. Striker, which is supposed to be doing damage, like for example this May over here, right? Supposedly a striker to do damage, has potion to heal your teams, has your trainer move that buffs your entire team's speed, right? Let's not go to Diantha, and then has like defense buffs for your team. So some strikers could do other things, right? And then tech, again, this guy's like, the top damage dealer in the entire game, and like he's a tech. Although, if you look at like the list of damage dealers, on the top, it's most of them are attacks. Not all, but most of them are. And then in supports, think this guy, for example, could do some serious damage with this Luster Purge in like Psychic terrain, especially every time it hits, it debuffs the opponent's special defense, which is supposed to be a text drop, but this guy also does it, right? So again, these rolls are relatively fluid. They're not that hard. The only one thing that all these rolls definitely do have over here is that, and that's one thing that doesn't change no matter what the meta is their innate 6-star EX buff for their sync moves, right? So they all do different things. Tax is they have a separate 1.5 times multiplier onto their syncs, which is why all the strongest sync nukers in the game are all techs. All of them are techs, right? So they have the strongest sync nukes in the game. For strikers, their 6-star EX effect turns it so that it hits. This is a tech. Give me a sec. There we go. There's a striker. It targets all opponents, right? Instead of just single target sync, it's an AoE sync. That's what striker EXs are. And then support EXs give your team an extra sync buff after you sync, which is incredibly powerful, right? A sync buff basically gives your team 50% more damage. Entire team 50% more damage for the rest of the battle, right? And support EXs, if you sync with support EXs, you get double that. It's only for the first time in the battle, or else it'll be way too OP, right? But even though it is for the first time battle, incredibly powerful, right? So that is one thing that doesn't change about these rolls. So no matter how fluid some things might be, yeah, right? That's one thing that doesn't change. Okay, so another thing, if you look over here, right, at the 1, 2, 3, that's the order in which the opponent targets your units. Obviously, you generally, in most case scenarios, want, not always, there are some units that want to be targeted even though they're not tanks, but generally you want your tanks getting targeted in the first slot over there, right? So, for example, we could throw in this Cynthia over here, this Lucario Cynthia, which is the number 1 tank in the game right now, in that slot, because we want her to be the one that that is getting hit, right? Because she takes like no damage. You could change these, right? So you could have these push-in swapped if you click on this tactics button over here, right? That changes which unit gets targeted first. As you can see over here, it says first target, second target, third target. Again, in our case, we want Cynthia in the first target. I mean, if you look at their defensive stats, you could see it relatively easily. Also, you could just click on this gear for a really quick overview of your team stats. Clearly, she has the highest defenses and HP, so you want her over here. As for who's second, I guess Lucas has like slightly better defensive stats than Cyrus over here, but Cyrus also has a move which cuts into his own HP, so generally you want Lucas in the second one. Not that it really matters, because let's be real, they are not getting through Cynthia. So anyways, so that would be an example over there, right, in terms of targeting order and such. So if you do want to talk a bit about gears are just, as you can see, extra stat buffs for your team, and they are really good. Go grind them out, especially the 3-star ones. And they do have types. Even though they have types, they buff your whole team, right? It doesn't buff it for that specific type. For example, if we put in a fighting bracelet, it still buffs for Lucas and Cyrus, even though they're not fighting. Cynthia just gets the full buff, right? If you're not of the type, you only get half the buff. So that's why Lucas Cyrus getting a bit lower over there, and then Cynthia gets a bit more. But since both Lucas and Cyrus are special attackers, right? Roar of Time and Hydro Pump / Spatial Rend, those are all special moves. You could have the Bandana, which buffs special attack. That one be Dragon. You could have Fighting Bracelet be Fighting, because neither Lucas nor Cyrus has any physical moves. And then Cynthia, you get extra 20 defense for the bracelet, right? And then for the pin, you probably want Fighting as well, just to give your tank Cynthia 70 more HP, because obviously she doesn't have enough being the already number 1 tank in the game. That aside, so that's basically how you configure how to move your teams around in terms of targeting order and gear, all that stuff. So let's actually start getting into team building then. So the first step, in terms of when you ask yourself, what team do I want here? you look at the opponent. You want to see what the opponent does so you could effectively counter them with a team. There are certain teams that are incredibly OP that could defeat like anything, without even looking at that, which is fine. But generally, you want to look at the opponent's weaknesses so you could use units to effectively counter them. So, for example, in this stage, Chantal, first of all, she is weak to ground type damage, right? So you want to use damage dealers that are ground type in this specific example. And if you also look at them, any other things to worry about, they do have fire type moves, and our tank is weak to fire, so that is something to worry about. Although, again, in this specific case, Cynthia is way too powerful for that, so it doesn't matter that much. But if it was like a bit of a weaker tank, then that might be something to consider, right? Maybe don't have your tank be weak to whatever, attack move the opponent has over here, right? You could look at some other hints for the stage. And, for example, you can see that they're going to set Sun, it seems like. It looks like they're going to sleep your team, right? So if you don't want to get slept, you could throw in units, for example, make your tank have a wide awake, which makes so they can't sleep, or units that have like full heal that could cure sleep or whatever, or just make it so that the unit that you're that gets slept is the one that sinks, because if you do sink, it gets rid of the sleeping condition at least, right? And they do use special moves, right? So you want special tanks over here. Again, Cynthia's good in both, but for example, if you don't have Cynthia over here, you want someone. You don't want a physical tank, you want a special tank, right? So, for example, Steelix is a very physically defensive, whatever. Big physical tank, all right? If you look at it, physical defense, very, very, very high. Special defense is not like terrible, but not as close as it's defense. Physical defense is like double the special defense, right? So you probably don't want to bring Steelix, and you probably want someone more with better special defense, maybe like Cresselia, for example. Although Cresselia is good in both. I don't know who's only good in one. Sabrina's only good in one, I guess. Alexam, I heard physical defense is not that bad. Come on. Yeah, there's certain options that you could go for, right? And if you look at the opponent's weakness, there are like generally, for example, champion stages, there are like further tips, right, where they tell you, what other stuff the opponent does, right? It looks like strike your opponent for special attacks. Maybe the opponent's special defenses are lower. Inflict poison or bad. Okay, these aren't really relevant. This guide is not that good. Anyways, let's ignore that. So some are good. Some, for example, some stages have very, very specific conditions that you do have to meet, or else you basically do like no damage to them. For example, I think there's like a Wallace stage that you have to poison. The poison weak Wallace stage, you have to poison that Wallace as a passive, where if you don't poison him, I think you don't like crit, which is a huge deal, right? So anyways, in terms of basics, right? So on your team, generally you want a tank. The composition of strike, tech, support, it doesn't have to be one strike, one tech support, and one support. In fact, generally the comp is usually one support plus either one tech, one striker, or one support plus two techs, or one support plus two strikers. It really depends on what sort of units you have working out for you. Generally, there's not too many comps with two supports, and that's not saying supports are bad, or supports, in my opinion, are the most important role in this game, especially in something like Legendary Gauntlet, which is one of the hardest contents in the game, right? Content. Anyways, so not saying that support, but generally supports are so powerful that only one is necessary. How about that? That sounds a bit better. So yeah, you have to find a support that could buff both your techs / strikers, right? Whether it's two strikers, two techs, one striker, one tech. Find one support that could buff both of them well and have them both deal damage, right? And that's generally how it goes. Are there comps that could use two supports? Yes, there are comps that could use two supports. Those are a bit more special. Those are generally for some units that are a bit more, that need more to actually function well, right? That generally aren't as powerful. So there are some teams that really need that. There are some certain modes that maybe they did do a bit too much damage. Your damage dealer is a bit too weak defensively. Maybe you would want a second support, but generally you don't run 2 supports too much. Do you run 3 strikers or 3 techs? 3 strikers is kind of rare. 3 strikers are kind of rare. Even though we've talked about that, a lot of these roles are a bit fluid. A lot of your strikers can do a lot of support stuff and tech stuff. But one thing is slightly rare for strikers. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, right? Is tanking. There aren't that many strikers that tank. Well, there are a few that do. Like for example, this Ashe is a decent tank. This Emic could take a few physical hits, right? But generally, strikers don't tank fantastic. This guy's pretty good tank. But yeah, generally, strikers aren't there. And the other thing is, you have to make sure you have consistent enough move gauges so that you could queue up a move with all 3 of your units in one turn, right? Because that's how you get your sync move countdown going, and that's one of the most I won't say most important, but one of the top priorities when team building is move gauges. Does your team have enough speed to consistently queue up 3 moves a turn, right? And you just have enough gauges for that. So that's maybe another reason why 3 striker comps aren't super popular. 3 tech comps are definitely very, pretty popular and doable. Just because techs are generally, like, if you want to talk about fluidity, techs are generally the most fluid of all 3 roles. Not because nature of techs, it's just the units that have come out that are techs, right? So 3 techs are generally fine. 3 supports, probably not, right? 2 supports is already pushing it a bit. 3 supports is doable. It's doable. It's just generally there's almost always going to be a better comp out there than whatever 3 support thing you're running. So yeah, that's in terms of roles, right? So all right, now that we've established that, let's think about a comp against this Hapu state, right? So okay, we're not against Hapu now. We're against Marshall. I guess we're in here. So yeah, so Marshall, it asks you to focus on special moves and crits, right? I mean, here's the thing. I do not care what this thing tells you. Always have crits. Crit is the #1 most powerful thing in this game because you have guaranteed crits on your regular moves at least, right? You know how in normal Pokemon games, crit's more of an RNG thing. In Pokemon Masters, crit can be guaranteed as long as you get +3 crit, right? +3 crit, you have guaranteed 100% crit, right? Unless the opponent has crit shields or whatever, right? You can crit the opponent. And crits are incredibly powerful because it goes through any defense buffs that opponent has, right? It has +6 defense. You crit through them, boom, gone. Who cares? Crits go through all the shields except for crit shields, for obvious reasons. So if the opponent has any reflect, light screen, physical damage reduction shield, special damage reduction shield, crits go right through all that as well, right? So crits are incredibly powerful. You have to make sure your unit crits. Have to make sure your damage dealer crits, right? If your damage dealer does not crit, you are going to have a rough time. It is not going to be fun, right? So, all right. So, poison team. Can we not do poison? Poison's whatever. Let's do poison. It's fine. So, poison over here. All right. So let's find a poison type damage dealer. You can look in poison, although to be honest, poison is the weakest type in the game, so neither of these are really good. You can off type, but the strongest poison type damage is actually Nidoking with his poison jab. He does have a poison jab, and he also has a poison max move, right? So for this case, let's just go with Nidoking, right? Max ooze, very powerful poison type damage dealer, easily the strongest poison type damage dealer. So all right, they're weak to poison. They did say special, but the stage shouldn't be that bad, even if you are going with physical. So all right, let's go. Nidoking. And he's gonna be poison, right? So next step, what you're gonna look at is look at what buffs your striker has, or your damage dealer doesn't have to striker. Look at what your damage dealer has in terms of buffs, and look what else you need, what support you need. What support you use on your team depends on what freaking support your damage dealers needs, right? So his trainer move over here raises attack by 6, applies crit next effect to the user, applies super effective up next to the user. Alright, so what do you need here? Well, you need crit. Well, you say, oh, come on, he already has guaranteed crit next. Well, yeah, that's only for one move. You want to crit the entire game, so better go get a crit crit buffer, right? So all right, so you want a crit buffer. All right, so you want to look at your second damage dealer. If you want to go with another poison type damage dealer, maybe you go with the other poison type damage dealer. It's not poison, which is Alistair, right? Also a pretty solid poison type damage dealer. Also not poison type, skills type. But you have Sludge Bomb over here, and you also have another Max Ooze, so he's also a solid poison type damage. So you have a bit of a dilemma over here, because Gengar is special and Nidoking is physical. But thankfully for you, if you have Nidoking, but for our example, Nidoking buffs his physical attack +6 already in one move, so he doesn't need a physical support. So all you need is just to satisfy Gengar's needs over here, right? Which in this case, he only buffs special attack and crit by 2, so you don't have to worry about crit for Alistair. You have to worry about crit for Nidoking. So you're missing 2 special attack and special attack. All these stats except for crit cap out at 6. Crit caps out at 3. So all right, so he has 2 uses, buffs a special attack by 2 every time. So you need a support that could max out crit for Nidoking and give at least +2 special attack for Gengar. Alright, so you look at supports, right? That could max out crit and buff special attack. And if you also look at the team, look at Nidoking speed. It's not terrible, but not super fast either. Alistair is not really fast, so you maybe think about, okay, let's also have support in there that could buff a bit of either buff speed or give any sort of like move gauge acceleration stuff, because again, your team is a bit slow, right? It is a bit slow. So let's see, a special buffer that can max crit for the team and give some speed. We could go with Sabrina. That is an option. There are a lot of other units that you go for this. I mean, Ho-Oh, if you have Ho-Oh EX'd and have him gridded, that could be an option too. I mean, Sabrina, you also have to grid her, but yeah, let's see, is there anyone else? You can filter if you don't know what units do, right? You could, for example, target an ally, all allies, and then raises, let's do special attack and like crit. It's not all, it shows units that like only do one of those things, so it's not like a perfect filter system, right? But for example, over here, you could also throw Lyra in there. That's also an option. She can max out again, after you grid her, max out your team's crit and then buff some speed, not as much speed as Sabrina, unless you single her, get the sun up, etc. Which I'm not a huge fan of because that's way too slow, but that's an option, right? That's an option as well. But yeah, you go with Kiawe as well. He buffs like everything over there. Not a lot, but your team doesn't really need a lot, so Kiawe could also be an option over there. So yeah, a lot of things you could do. SS Chris, right? Although not that great on the speed building department, but yeah. This is a really, really basic team comp that you could run, right? So it makes sense, everything works out, and just go in and win. So that's a very, very basic team comp. Let's talk a bit about some other more in-depth things. So outside of the most fundamental things you have to satisfy, generally damage dealers will have multipliers, which are multipliers on their moves to make them more powerful, right? And on top of satisfying their most basic offensive stats and make sure that speed is good enough, you also want to make sure you could get the most out of a damage dealer's multipliers. For example, if we look at Giovanni, let's see, let me find a, yeah, this is a poison grid. He doesn't really have any multiplier, but he does have one, which is super duper effective too. Powers up moves that are super effective. This is just based on the opponent. As long as you're super effective against the opponent, you'll get that multiplier without any issues. Same with his max double down 5, right? Hit the gas is another multiplier. This one is all based on himself. But if we look at Gengar, for example, there's a few multipliers that aren't things that he could, well, I mean, he could really do it himself as well, but maybe this isn't like the best example. Maybe not the best example of these two units. So you have Hold Hostage, where you have to restrain your opponent, and then Toxic Power, where you have to poison the opponent. He can't do it himself because you could poison over here, and then If you use Gmax Terror, that could restrain the opponents. There's also another node in the sync that could restrain the opponents for him as well. Let's find a different example. Let's do Alder, right? Like Alder, for example. If you want to use, it's not that great of an example either. Let's do Berg. All right, let's do Berg. So, for example, if we're running a Berg grid that has, all right, Smarty Pants. The more the opponent's special defense is lower, the more it powers up the user's sync move. Can he lower the opponent's special defense? Yes, he can. Is he really good at it? No, not really, right? Because Bug Buzz, only 10%, even with extra honor rolls, it doesn't get very, very high. So generally, you want a more reliable special defense debuffer. So, for example, in this case, you could throw in Latios, right? Latios as a support. First of all, you still satisfy the basics, right? You have enough special attack to max out his special attack, and you can max out his crit after if you grid Latios, sync with Latios, etc. So max crit, max special attack done, but you also have Lesser Purge, which has a guaranteed chance of debuffing the opponent's special defense by 2 thanks to its passive, right? So yeah, a lot of multipliers. There are multipliers based on debuffing the opponent's stats. There are multipliers based on buffing your own stats, right? There are multipliers based on, you know, what weather or what field effect, what zone, right, terrain is on the stage. If the opponent is flinch trap confused, if their status, right, all that stuff. There's a lot of different multipliers, so just make sure you fulfill those, right? So now that's, I guess, the very, very, very basics of team comp in this game. Let's talk a bit about some different ones where field effects are involved, right? Field effects generally, it refers to a broad range of things, right? Field effects could be like move gauge acceleration, crit shield, weather, right? But the ones we're talking about are damage amplifying field effects, right? Which is zones, terrains, and a few weathers. Not all weathers amplify them, but some weathers do. Some weathers do amplify based on your team having the multiplier for it, right? So weather is a bit of a special example, which let's talk about now, right? So let's start with weathers. So there's a few weathers in this game. You got rain, you got sun, you got hail, and sandstorm, which is, I think, all that you have in the main series, if you don't count like the weird stuff that Legend Arceus also does. So yeah, sand, hail, sun, and rain. So these 4 are different. You could categorize them into 2 different types of weather teams. Sun and rain are kind of in their own category, and then hail and sand are in their own category, because sun and rain directly multiplies your teams or the specific fire and water type moves damage, right? Without any passes, without any other multipliers, they straight up give an extra 50%, right, damage buff to water/fire type moves. Sand and hail, on the other hand, don't do that. In fact, they don't really do anything other than the extra chip damage that everyone takes if they don't have some sort of shelter, right? So sand and hail don't really do that. So don't go, just, I'm gonna run a hail team with a hail unit and an ice type damage dealer, even though that ice type damage dealer doesn't have any hail based multipliers. So hail actually does like nothing there, right? So make sure you have that distinction. So all right, let's build a rain team over here, right? So if we look, rain, they're not all rain setters are water type. For example, Winona's a rain setter and she's like flying type, right? She has rain dance, she's flying, but a lot of them are water types. And again, it only buffs water types in terms of the innate condition of rain. Rain can still buff other different types, but those are all multiplier based, right? If someone has like a Raging Rain 5, which is passive based on buffing your attack by 50% if there's rain or whatever, right? So in those specific conditions, other types can also have that, but without any of those multipliers, it's water types, right? So first we have to find the rain unit. There's strikers that bring rain, there's techs that bring rain, there's supports that bring rain, right? generally, whether all these field effect stuff are generally handled by tech units, but this year and even a bit of last year, they've started expanding it to make strikers sometimes bring it and supports bring it, right? So for example, let's run one with support over here, right? So Chris, S is Chris, has Rain Dance, sets Rain, and is good, right? So she's a support, she can set Rain over here. If you look at her, she is a special support, right? So you don't have to run her with special units. You could run her with physical units, but generally special is a bit better because she's really good for that, right? So yeah, and all right, let's throw in some special water type damage dealers then. In this case, you could maybe throw in Kyogre. Kyogre's also nice because Kyogre also brings rain itself and also extends rain by 50%. Weather usually only extends around one sync cycle. It depends. It's not like a hard only one sync cycle amount of time, right? Sometimes if you accelerate move, you use move gauge acceleration, maybe it doesn't last longer, but you can get more moves out, right? I guess more powerful moves out in that time period. If for example, animations are faster, right? There are shorter animations, then okay, maybe it lasts more turns, right? It's not like a physically like turn-based thing, it's more of a time-based thing, but anyways, that aside, right, so we have the damage healer and the Kyogre, really powerful. Origin Pulse, big move, and that's buffed by Chris over here. Chris could also help buff Kyogre's special attack and crit, even though Kyogre could buff it itself, but since you have a support to buff it, that saves you extra turns, so Kyogre can spam more Origin Pulses instead of spending turns doing 0 damage and buffing its own stats, right? Which you should buff your stats, but maybe if you have someone else to help you do it, probably better to have the other person do it, right? And focus on damage healing. And then maybe someone else over here, throwing this Glory in, Summer Glory. She's also a special damage heal with Snipe Shot over here, and she, unlike Kyogre, can't really buff her own stats, so perfect for, well, she can, it's terribly slow and not worth it, so fantastic. You got Suicune over there to buff both their stats at the same time, so there you go, you got a weather team. Pretty simple, pretty basic. Moving on to terrains, it's the same concept, basically, right? Except for all the terrains that are in the game at the moment, they all innately buff the corresponding types, right? So there's no like a hail version of terrain or a sandstorm version of terrain. Although, if Misty Terrain does come into the game in the future, that might be like a hail or sandstorm of terrains, because Misty Terrain is one terrain that doesn't innately buff any like damage, right? So it's that fairy type move. It has nothing to do with fairy types, honestly. So yeah. All right, so let's look at some terrains. Let's do a electric terrain, for example. Right, we have a lot of electric terrain setters. We have this Pikachu that sets electric terrain. He sets electric terrain on a sync only once, not that great. She sets electric terrain only once on max move as well, not the best either. And then he sets electric terrain with electric terrain. So yeah, the two most reliable ones, probably Red and Vulcan over here. Let's use Red for this example. Right, we could have Red over here, use electric terrain. Alright, so let's throw in some electric type damage dealers, right? So, for example, we throw in this Vulcaner, he's electric type, gets buffed by the terrain. Very good. And again, it doesn't have to be electric types that can take advantage of electric type terrain. Theoretically, there could be other units that aren't electric type that have like the passive that take advantage of electric terrain buffs. Although I don't think, are there any of those in the game at the moment? I don't think so, but theoretically that could be a possibility. There's a lot of that for sun and rain, not so much for the terrains though, right? So yeah, that could be an option. Maybe, alright, you want to support over here, maybe to help max out Vulcaner's stuff. Oh, a lot of people care about the typing with sports. Typing with sports really do not matter that much in this game. Don't think that, oh, electric terrain team, so, it must mean I should use something like Singsu Lisa to get the most out of it. No, use a better, the support, even if it's not electric type, because again, the fact that she's the same type, doesn't really matter that much. Though in Electric Terrain, her Thunder hits a bit harder, but you're also not getting like the full buff for herself anyways. And you probably don't want to do that because that costs a lot of gauges, right? For your support, generally you want her to use like Thunder Shock instead, so like negligible damage from Sing to Lisa. You might want to run her for like the sync move countdown though, which is nice. But you know, outside that, like for example, in this case, let's just go for like a really good special support. You keep Chris here. Chris is very powerful, or like something like Gladios, and there you go. You got your Electric Terrain team, right? Again, there's a lot of different multipliers that could be based on some of these, or some passives, not even multipliers sometimes. For example, Shock Recovery, you could heal, you know, Volkner gradually heals himself in Electric Terrain and stuff, right? So, alright, that's an example for Terrain, I guess. Moving on, let's talk a bit about zone teams. Not every type in the game has zones yet so far. There's still a few that haven't gotten zones, but almost every single type in the game has zones. And there are also other types that probably aren't going to be getting zones, which is going to be Psychic, Electric, Grass, Fire, and Water. I think those are all the ones at the moment, right? So basically, types that have already innate 1.5 times multiplier buffs or field effect multiplier buffs, right? So, you know, we're not getting Psychic Zone probably, right? Because Psychic already has Psychic Terrain, and that's basically the same as like a theoretical Psychic Zone, right? So that's why there's none of that. But at the moment in the game of this recording, there's Ground Zone, Fighting Zone, Flying Zone, Bug Zone, Ghost Zone, Dragon Zone, Dark Zone, and Steel Zone, right? There's a few more still yet to come out, but at the moment, those are the ones that we have. And, alright, for zones, I guess we can actually go to, like, one of the... Alright, for example, let's do Steel Zone, right? This guy's weak to Steel. Let's do Steel Zone. The Steel Zone setters aren't as plentiful as any of the others yet, mostly because Zone is a very new concept, introduced just the end of last year, right? Which is basically the beginning of this year, right? So we haven't even gotten one of each type yet, so that's why we don't have duplicates. The only zone that has like one extra unit is like Ghost Zone, and it's SC Lily is the other one, although she's not a good zone setter at all. You only have a 5% chance to get Ghost Zone from her, so she doesn't really count. But yeah, that aside, for example, Steel Zone, the Steel Zone setter in this game at the moment is Palatine's Marnie. I do believe we're going to be having more zone setters in the future for the same type, so but at the moment, it's going to be Palatine's Marnie, right? So, alright, Palatine's Marnie, Steel Zone setter, you want Steel type, you know, friends over here, right? And for Palatine's Marnie specifically, all these different zone units have different ways of helping the same types, right? For example, Bug Zone is Ingo. Bug Zone setter is Ingo. He's very good for physical damage dealers, right? So generally you want to throw in physical damage dealers over there. Marnie is generally okay for both, but like slightly better for physical units. It really depends on what. Oh, here's one of those, right? Powers up user sync when the zone is Steel Zone. Going back to something we talked about in Terrains. Again, so far it's only been Steel units that have this, but theoretically it could be on some like non-Steel unit over here. Right, so there's that at least, and yeah, it doesn't really matter. You could throw in special Steel units in with her as well, right? And yeah, just have to make sure the team is fast enough, because that is one downside for Marnie. She is a bit slow, right? So I guess faster Steel type units would be something like a Gloria, right? He's not super fast. He's really slow too. Most Steel units are pretty slow. I guess he's pretty fast, but he's also not very good. Although he's about to get a grid, which makes him a lot better, right? So, but you know, for example, one of the best options would be Kimono Grims, even though he's really slow. Which is why in this case you want a support that could give you some speed, right? Something like a Sonya Yamper, for example. Sonya Yamper over here could help max out Marnie's physical attack, right, as well as crit a bit faster, and also makes it so the speed on this team isn't like absolutely atrocious, right? So yeah, that's basically zone. Just pick up the type for your team. And that's how you make the most of it. You don't have to pick out a teammate that's of the same type that takes advantage of the zone, but like if you're doing zone, why not? It's not like a strict rule, but it's good to. All right, it's good to. Again, different zone setters, they kind of sort of dictate what sort of a team that you really want to build, right? For example, again, Marnie's one of the better zone units in my personal opinion. She kind of does a bit of everything over here. She nukes really hard. Her DPS is really, really good, so she doesn't have to worry about like any like potential downsides that she does have. There are like some other zone setters that do have some downsides. For example, if you want to look at again, that Ingo was a good example, right? He is more of a physical. He helps physical bug types so much more than special bug types, right? I guess another example would be like maybe like Skyla. She's a solid zone setter, but like one of her downsides is that her DPS is pretty bad, right? So she has a good nuke, so you can take advantage of that, but her DPS is really bad, so you have to make sure you have some good DPS units over here. And since her nuke is so good, you don't have to actually run any like flying type nukers over here because she does the job already, right? So those you have to look at the specific units, right, in terms of like what they really do for their respective zone types. So those have to be more specific there, right? So there you go, folks. That's I guess updated team building guide for 2022. Got zone, right? Again, if you're new to the game or you're returning, you might think, what the heck is zone? It's not a thing in the main series. Might be a bit surprised, but it's actually really simple. It's really basically just the same as like a psychic terrain or electric terrain or sun or rain, except for that specific type, right? Because the game is trying to balance, because before zones were introduced, this game was very unbalanced. Rain, sun, electric, and psychic teams were, well, maybe not electric. Electric was always really bad until now, right? Well, I guess maybe this New Year's, because New Year Rocket was pretty good. But certain types were just so much better than other types because they had the advantage of a 1.5 times multiplier with either, again, weather or terrain. So the game introduced zones to balance the other types to make, you know, for example, steel type not as absolutely terrible, right, in comparison to, again, psychic or water or fire or whatever, right, at the time. And yeah, there we go. It's not very complicated. It sounds like a completely new concept, but it's really just zone, man. Zone is just basically the other two, right? As long as you get the basics down, it's very simple, honestly. All right, so. All right, one last thing is master passive, right? So if you guys pulled, you know, near the game, pulled one of the Pikachus, or I guess Cynthia as well, right? You'd notice this extra purple passive thing with like a medal on it. So these are called master passives. These are usually units that come from Masterverse. Not all. There's like a few free ones too, but they all suck, so ignore them. So these are basically passives that buff your team's either damage reduction or damage dealt, regular move damage dealt. Right, so that's like regular moves and buddy moves. Doesn't count max moves or sync moves, unfortunately. But same for damage reduction. You don't reduce the damage of like sync moves, but like regular moves, right? So in this case, it's stages, or not stages. It's a passive that, for example, over here, Counter Flag Bearer powers up moves of all allied sync pairs by 10%, reduces attack move damage taken by all allied sync pairs by 20%. The more allied sync pairs with the Kanto theme you have on your team, the higher those percentages are. So if you have more Kanto units on your team, the more buffs, right? And those are dependent on the theme skill, right? There are certain Kanto characters that maybe don't have the Kanto theme skill. For example, SS Giovanni, he's actually Johto. He's from the Johto villain arc, right? He's Johto Giovanni. So make sure you don't mess that one up by just thinking you know the character and then you throw it in there and it's like it's not, right? So it's based on theme skill, so make sure you have the theme skill there at least, right? So the more certain theme skill character you have on the team, the more it buffs these up, right? So for example, in this case, each additional sync pair powers up moves by 10% and reduces damage by 3%. Maximum power up is 30%. Obviously you only have 3 slots in the team, right? And maximum damage reduction is 26%, right? So pretty standard, right? Pretty I'd say relatively easy to understand. There's four types of master passives at the moment. There's 3 that are based on regions, 1's based on types. The type one, again, those are the BP units. They suck, ignore them, honestly. But like, for example, Nito over here has like ground teamwork, powers up the moves all allies by 10%, reduces damage taken by 10%. Again, terrible, not worth running at all. And then more ground theme that you have on your team, those higher those percentage are. Each additional powers up moves by 5%. Again, these numbers are really straight up not worth it, right? To like build like a team around these, right? So it's usually the ones you want is the ones with flag bearer, spirit, or pride, right? So it's either region, flag bearer, region, pride, region, spirit, right? Those are the good ones. Those are good ones. So she's also flag bearer. Let's see. Let's go back to Kanto. Let's go back to Kanto, for example. So the other one is a spirit. Spirit is also for the same region, but this is only for special attack and special attack reduction. But it buffs so much more, which is why generally these are the most powerful passes, right? I'd say spirit and pride, flag bearer, and then like the weird like type ones. So yeah, these only buff special attack moves and only reduce special attack damage taken, right? But again, it buffs it so much more. Each additional sync pair powers up moves by 15%, caps out at 50%, and 31% damage reduction, right? So that's very good. 50% damage, 31% damage reduction. So yeah, for example, all right, these stack. So for example, if we want to do a counter team, we can throw in red there for Kanto flag bearer. Then we got counter spirit over here. So boom, you got some solid stacks already over here, right? So that's 2 characters. So you already have what, 20% extra damage bonus from Kanto flag bearer, and since you have Kanto spirit as well, this one for special moves only. So in this case, just mostly Pikachu, right? Because Pikachu's the special damage dealer. Red is more physical damage dealer, but yeah, in this case you have 20% plus 15%, that's 35%, so you have 55% buff for Pikachu, right? Pikachu gets a 55% buff over here, and then Red. They're both Pikachus. Ash gets 55% buff. Red gets a how much was it? 35%, right? Buff or something like that. No, I forgot. 20% buff, right? And if you throw in like another, if you want your support to, for example, be a Kanto one, throw in, for example, New Year's Sabrina. We're very good in this team comp, and that can make it, you have a third one. So in this case, you cap it out at 30%. His physical moves get buffed by 30%, and his special moves get buffed by 80%, right? I'm just doing mental math over here, right? Yeah, 50% plus 30%, 80%, which is huge, right? So that's really nice. And then she gets like a bunch of like damage reduction here as well, right? As the tank. So that's how Master Passive works. Again, there's only 2 main ones, which is either the region-based ones, or the type-based ones. Type-based ones are bad. Region-based ones are pretty good. And yeah, you can mix and match regions as well. Like if you have like someone who is not of the region, for example, if over here you have like Deoxys, right? He's not from Kanto. He still gets the buffs. He just doesn't contribute to increasing the buffs further. He still gets the buffs. He still has the extra, what, 55%? I want to say 55% special attack bonus and whatever damage reduction, right? That equals to, he gets that as well. He just doesn't add to it further, right? So yeah, that's Master Passives, I guess, over here. And we could quickly talk a bit about co-op. Co-op team comps don't really matter that much. I mean, this one's just weak to electric. Just throw like someone with, just throw electric unit in there, and then like you're good. You have 3 units. You only use 1 at a time instead of 3. It's like you have 3 players in there, and then each person sends out 1 unit at a time. When yours goes down, then you could maybe switch to another one, or if you want to manually swap, you can swap that as well. Nothing too interesting here. It's just 1 unit, right? Instead of the 3, which is more, I guess, slightly complicated. If you have friends, you have to coordinate with your friends in terms of what people want to bring. Also, you also don't have to, because co-op are like stupid easy, so just AFK and you'll be fine. There's also the solo. There's the solo one where you could just totally ignore co-oping with other people and just build like a 9 unit, create your own team thing. Not all stages have these, but like, yeah, then okay, you have 3. Although you don't control them, you only control the middle lane. You control these, and then like the AI controls the 2 sides, so do keep that in mind. But you could give them Pokemon, right? You can't have duplicates in there though. Co-op, you can have duplicates if you're co-oping with like other actual people, right? So for example, if all 3 of you have like Thunderbolt Red and you want to use that, then sure, then you could have 3 Thunderbolt Reds, which ends, or different Reds. It could be like a Thunderbolt Red, a Singsu Red, or a Classic Red. In a single player, obviously you can't do that. You can't have 2 of the same name characters. So there's, I guess, that one thing there, right? So yeah. Anyways, that's me this one. I guess hope you all enjoyed. Guys, think in the comments down below. Like, enjoy the videos for my channel for some more Pokemon Masters content, all that stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next one then.